You sit down to start that important project, and suddenly your mind floods with every possible distraction. You check your phone, organize your desk, make another coffee, anything but the actual work. You tell yourself you're just not motivated today. Maybe tomorrow will be different. But here's what's really happening. You're not avoiding the task. You're avoiding the emotions that come with it. The fear of not being good enough. The anxiety of potentially failing. The overwhelm of not knowing where to start. Al-Ghazali understood this 900 years ago when he wrote about the hidden battles within the human soul. Modern psychology now proves he was absolutely right. Picture this scene. You have a presentation due tomorrow. Instead of working on it, you spend 3 hours cleaning your room, checking social media, and researching completely unrelated topics. Sound familiar? This isn't random behavior. It's your brain running a sophisticated, emotional protection system. Al-Ghazali called this phenomenon the deception of the nafs. In his masterwork, The Revival of the Religious Sciences, he described how humans possess what he called multiple levels of consciousness competing for control over our actions. According to Al-Ghazali, there's the rational part of you that knows what you should do. It understands consequences, plans for the future, and wants to achieve meaningful goals. But there's also what he called the animal part of you that only cares about immediate comfort and avoiding any form of discomfort. He wrote that this animal consciousness is incredibly clever. It doesn't just tell you to avoid work completely. Instead, it tricks you into believing you'll do the work later when conditions are better. It creates elaborate justifications for delay. Sound familiar? Modern neuroscience has now confirmed that Al-Ghazali was remarkably accurate. Brain imaging studies show that when we procrastinate, activity increases in the emotional centers of our brain, particularly areas that process fear and threat. Meanwhile, activity decreases in the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for planning and self-control. Here's what Al-Ghazali understood that most people miss. Procrastination isn't really about the task itself. It's about emotional avoidance. When you sit down to work on something important, your brain immediately starts calculating potential threats. What if you fail? What if it's not good enough? What if people judge you? These aren't conscious thoughts. They happen in milliseconds. And your emotional brain treats these possibilities as real dangers. So what does it do? It activates what researchers now call temporal discounting. You focus intensely on avoiding immediate discomfort, even though this creates much bigger problems later. Al-Ghazali observed this exact pattern centuries ago. He noted that the animal consciousness has no memory for positive experiences, only for threats and discomforts. It lives in a perpetual state of anxiety about potential problems while completely ignoring evidence of past successes. Think about the last time you finally started something you'd been putting off. How did it feel once you got into the flow? Most people report that the actual work was much more manageable than they expected. But your brain forgets this lesson every single time. A comprehensive analysis of 691 studies on procrastination revealed the strongest predictors aren't related to time management skills or intelligence. They're task aversiveness, impulsiveness, and low self-confidence. Task aversiveness means how unpleasant or threatening a task feels emotionally. The more a task triggers anxiety, boredom, frustration, or self-doubt, the more likely you are to postpone it. This explains why you might easily spend hours on activities you enjoy, but can't bring yourself to work on important projects that feel emotionally challenging. Al-Ghazali taught that this emotional resistance isn't something to fight or eliminate. Instead, he developed a technique he called muraqabah, careful self-observation. When you feel resistance to starting a task, don't fight the feeling or judge yourself for having it. Simply notice it and begin anyway. This approach aligns perfectly with what modern psychology calls acceptance-based strategies. Rather than trying to eliminate anxiety or discomfort, you learn to experience these emotions without letting them dictate your behavior. But procrastination isn't just about avoiding negative emotions. Research shows that we systematically overestimate how bad we'll feel while doing difficult tasks and underestimate how good we'll feel after completing them. Your brain literally tricks you into believing that avoiding the task is protecting you from something worse than it actually is. Al-Ghazali understood this psychological trap. He taught that the animal consciousness operates like a frightened child, always expecting the worst possible outcome. It can't distinguish between actual threats and imagined ones. He described a specific training method for overcoming this pattern. Instead of waiting until you feel motivated, you begin with the smallest possible action. Not because small actions matter, but because they prove to your emotional brain that the task isn't actually dangerous. Modern behavioral psychology has validated this approach through what's called behavioral activation. Starting with tiny actions creates positive momentum and gradually reduces the emotional charge around difficult tasks. But there's another layer to procrastination that Al-Ghazali identified long before modern psychology caught up. He observed that people who consistently give in to immediate impulses become increasingly unable to tolerate any form of discomfort. Their capacity for sustained effort actually weakens over time, like a muscle that never gets exercised. Recent research confirms this insight. Chronic procrastinators show measurably different brain activity patterns. They have heightened activity in areas associated with emotional reactivity and decreased activity in areas responsible for executive control. The more you procrastinate, the harder it becomes to stop procrastinating. This creates what Al-Ghazali called the prison of habits. Each time you choose immediate comfort over meaningful action, you're not just avoiding one task. You're training your brain to expect that avoidance is always an option. So how do you break this cycle? Al-Ghazali's approach was surprisingly practical. First, he taught people to recognize what he called the whispers of justification. These are the seemingly logical reasons your mind generates for postponing important work. I work better under pressure. I need to be in the right mood. I should wait until I have more time. Al-Ghazali understood that these aren't rational thoughts. They're emotional protection strategies disguised as logic. Once you recognize them as such, they lose much of their power over you. Second, he emphasized what he called beginning without conditions. Most procrastination happens because we wait for perfect conditions. The right mood, the right time, the right level of motivation. But Al-Ghazali taught that action creates motivation more reliably than motivation creates action. Modern research validates this completely. Studies show that people who wait for motivation before starting important tasks wait significantly longer than people who start regardless of how they feel. Third, Al-Ghazali taught people to focus on process rather than outcomes. Instead of thinking, I need to finish this entire project, you think, I will work on this for the next 30 minutes. This reduces anxiety because the process is completely within your control, while outcomes always involve uncertainty. When you attach your self-worth to outcomes, every task becomes emotionally threatening because failure feels like a judgment on your entire identity. But when you focus on showing up and making effort, you can feel successful regardless of the final result. Fourth, Al-Ghazali emphasized the importance of understanding your future self. He encouraged people to regularly imagine how their future self would benefit from work done today. Not from guilt or pressure, but from genuine care for their own well-being. Recent psychological research shows that people who feel more connected to their future selves procrastinate significantly less. When you vividly imagine how your future self will benefit from work you do today, the emotional payoff becomes more immediate and compelling. But here's what might be Al-Ghazali's most important insight about procrastination. It's not really about productivity or time management. It's about your relationship with discomfort and uncertainty. People who procrastinate less haven't eliminated uncomfortable feelings. They've simply developed a different relationship with them. They understand that discomfort is temporary and manageable. They trust their ability to handle challenges. And they've learned that the anticipation of a task is usually much worse than the actual experience of doing it. Al-Ghazali taught that this shift requires what he called training the nafs, not through force or self-criticism, but through patient, consistent practice. Every time you choose to begin despite not feeling like it, you're building what he called spiritual muscle. The next time you find yourself procrastinating, remember this: you're not lazy, undisciplined, or fundamentally flawed. You're human. Your brain is trying to protect you from potential emotional pain. Thank it for the concern, and then gently choose to begin anyway. Al-Ghazali understood that true discipline isn't about forcing yourself to work. It's about developing a healthier relationship with discomfort. In his writings on self-discipline, he emphasized that the goal isn't to eliminate resistance, but to act despite it. That's the hidden secret behind procrastination. It's not about managing your time. It's about managing your relationship with discomfort. And once you understand that, everything changes.